what is going crazy is there has been a possible leak on set about Captain America, and we have learned more details that's even crazier than what I ever thought. Now, let's talk about this because this is not something that leakers brought up, but this is something that was found on set. Now, we all knew that Steve and Peggy's house was being rebuilt on set. Makes sense. Now, the thing that we didn't understand was they released put somebody on set released that there were swings and slides and play sets on Steve and Peggy's kind of lot, right, where their houses and etc. And what this is hinting to is that Steve and Peggy Carter possibly have freaking children. Yes, they have kids, and I'm gonna be honest. Like, this is actually insane to think that Steve and Peggy have had kids and that they have had a family and that they went and did this thing. Now, it shouldn't make sense because he did go and spend his whole life with Peggy Carter, but I just never thought about that. Now, I want to talk about a few things that's interesting. Now, if you guys remember, and I was watching Josh from the Dead of Nerds, shameless plug. And one of the things that he did say that I remembered is I do remember that they were talking about Captain America's son was going to pop up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. If you guys remember, they did rewrite that show, and so maybe he was going to pop up, and maybe we were going to see connections of him earlier. And it does seem like with the MCU, right, they're always like rewriting stuff, and with the stuff that they rewrite is always the good stuff. It's sad, but it's crazy that he was being talked about, and it's the same thing about how there's possibly going to be a Nomad project that was being worked on, but they didn't continue working on that Nomad project, and which is why a lot of people find it interesting that Steve Rogers is going to be a part of this Avengers Doomsday plot in the way that he is. Now, what does it mean for Captain America to have kids? What this means is that number one, this makes the stakes even higher, because I do think that if Doctor Doom came to Steve Rogers and gave him a really understanding reason that Steve Rogers caused a rift in the multiverse, I do think that Steve Rogers will go and save his life. But what if it's worse than that? What if it isn't Steve Rogers has to die? Because I have been thinking about this, right? Because the TVA and Loki season 1, they did point out the fact that everything that happened in Avengers was supposed to happen. So it might not be the fact that Steve went and spent his life with Peggy, but what if the issue is that Captain America had children? Kind of like when Loki and Sylvie came together, right? The whole entire branch timeline and multiverse started to go red, right? What if Steve Rogers having kids is a similar thing? So what if Doctor Doom isn't there to kill Steve Rogers? Hear this, but he's there to kill Steve Rogers' children. Now that makes things 10 times worse. So now we might possibly be seeing a plot to where Steve Rogers has to defend Doctor Doom and Clea and Doctor Strange or whoever is up there from, like, he has to defend them from killing his own children. And so now we might have a protector part where Captain America has to hop on the defense and protect his children from being killed by Doctor Doom. And what if the only answer is that Steve Rogers has to sacrifice his kids? At least the only seeable answer that Doctor Doom has. And so that makes Doctor Doom, number one of the most menacing characters in the MCU, because now we are seeing the fact that, Doctor Doom is putting children on the freaking altar to sacrifice to save the multiverse, right? And the thing is that when kids get involved, things get weird. Things get different, right? The same thing and think about this, right? Tony Stark said the same thing in Endgame. When Tony Stark first drove up to the Avengers compound, right? And him and Steve Rogers were having that conversation. What did Tony Stark say? He said, bring everyone back. That is the plan. But keep everything I have, I must. And I won't roll the dice on that. We are about to see Steve possibly do the same thing. He is willing to sacrifice himself. He's willing to go and fight the good fight and save the entire multiverse. But what he's not going to do is sacrifice his children, no matter how wrong it is. And some might think this might go against Steve Rogers as a character. But if you guys have had a child, you would understand we would understand the range that you would go to try to do that. And I think Steve Rogers trying to save his children, keeping his children, might be in Steve Rogers' character. Because, he turned on the whole world for Bucky. So but what do you think he's going to do for his own children? So, yeah, I think that Steve Rogers having children is going to mean a lot in that area. And as I said, like, one of the goals in this movie is to make Doctor Doom the most menacing villain that we have ever seen in the MCU, more menacing than Thanos. What is more menacing than Doctor Doom being prepared and ready to sacrifice children? And I think that is going to question a lot of the morals of the Avengers. I think some are going to agree with to kill the kids. I think some aren't going to agree, and I think we're going to see a rift in different opinions. I can't wait to also hear what Doctor Strange has to say about this as well, and Spider-Man, and even Reed and all of these other characters, because they're going to try to find some sort of workaround to try to make it work. But the reality is that if Doctor Doom is right, then there's no way around it. And this is very similar to the Wanda stuff, right? Wanda made her own kids out of her imagination, and she had to say goodbye to them, but it worked because they weren't real, right? They were a figment of her imagination. But this isn't that. This is a whole different situation. So, because these are actual children, that came out of Peggy's stomach, what's to say, right? And these are real kids. So I think that this, as I said, makes the stakes 10 times harder, and this poses Doctor Doom to be one of the most menacing villains, giving this happen. So that's what I think is going on. I don't really think there's anything else that's crazier to go on there, but I think that's where Doctor Doom is going to be right there. We have to sacrifice your children, and that will be my theory if Steve Rogers' kids are in this movie. So I would love to hear what you guys think about that, and I would love to hear your opinions on it. But that's kind of where my mind is going. But we'd love to hear what you guys think. Please like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Stay crispy. Peace out.